Hello everyone and welcome to today's Cambridge University Press ELT webinar. I'm very pleased to welcome back as today's presenter, Deirdre Cijffers. Deirdre is a teacher trainer who's been involved in teaching and teacher development for the last 14 years and has taught English in 7 countries over the course of her career. She has an MA in online and distance education and has used blended learning with both students and teachers. She now works with teachers and institutions to help them get the best out of teaching and learning online. Over to you, Deirdre.
Thanks, Alistair. Fine, thanks. And hello and welcome everybody to today's motivational speech. I was asked to do this talk in a very boring voice to counteract the motivation theme, but I'm not going to be able to do that, I'm afraid. So motivation is one of the most difficult things that we have to contend with as teachers, with students who are working in a new way, and they're not necessarily used to doing things the way that we're asking them to do things now, and also they don't necessarily understand the value of what they're doing to the goals that they have. So what we're going to look at today is how to get our tired, unmotivated, bored, resistant students to do what we want them to do, essentially. So imagining that we are terribly stressed and hard-working teachers, which obviously we are, I think what we really deserve is an afternoon off. Would you agree? I think you do. So on this afternoon off, I'm going to give you 3 options of things to do. Okay, so they're numbered there, option 1, option 2, and option 3. In a moment, I will show you some images that are the options of things for you to do in your afternoon off. You will be able to see the images for 1 second. In the chat box, I need you to put the number underneath the picture of the activity that you want to do in your afternoon off. If you don't put a number in the chat box, it means you don't get an afternoon off and you have to go back to work all by yourself. Okay? So the idea is I'll show you the pictures, then they'll disappear, and while they're on the screen, you need to put the number of the activity you want to do. Ready? Let's go. Okay, that's ones. Okay, so not very many sporty people. There's some sporty people. Okay, all right. So in actual fact, okay, we all get an afternoon off. Good stuff. So in actual fact, we had 3 activities. We had going for coffee and cake, which I love to do, going for shopping, which I like less, and playing some sort of a sport, which depending on the weather can be very nice. If I were being manipulative, I would possibly try and get you to do the sporty one, because obviously it's the best one for you. So having a cup of coffee is very nice and relaxing, but as we know, caffeine and sugar are not our best friends. Shopping, yes, it's very enjoyable, but you use up all your money. But in doing a sport, you can end up feeling better about yourself, etc. We have none of these. Ideas come to us when we only have a second to respond. So what we're trying to do is get people to make a decision very quickly. And if we take a theory called nudge theory, I don't know if you've heard of this, but the idea is that we can, by presenting information in a certain way, we can influence the decisions that people make, and we can influence the actions that they take based on those. So if I were an evil capitalist, I would like you to choose the shopping one. And generally, what people like to see is, what people have seen in studies, is that when given 3 relatively similar choices, people tend to just go for the one in the middle when they're making a quick choice. But I think everybody else is a little bit healthier and more social. There are a lot of sporty people and a lot of people going for coffee. So nudge theory is all very well, but it's not quite everything that we need to do. So when we think about motivating students, what we're really thinking about is influencing their behaviour. So what we want them to do what we ask them to do. We want them to get what we want them to get out of it. So there are a lot of different ways that we can push them towards different things. And as teachers, we often rely on our authority as teachers to tell them to do something, but that may or may not get us any reaction at all. So if we're thinking about the nudge theory proposition, basically we present information or we give them choices, but we present the choices in such a way that they will make the best choice for them most easily. So the general idea is that it talks about automatic actions. So not necessarily things like your preferences of things to do on the day off, but your choices of what snack to have, for example. So this theory came into fashion with things like supermarket organization. So normally when you go to a supermarket, when you want to pay at the till, you'll have sweets. There's a lot of chocolate there. But then people decided that this wasn't the healthiest way to go about things, so they took away the sweets and they put in apples instead. So if you go to you go to pay and you're a little bit hungry, you'll pick up an apple rather than going far away to pick up some chocolate. You'll just pick up an apple and have that. Whereas before they were just picking up a bar of chocolate. So the idea was to influence people to make the thing that is the best idea the easiest thing to do. It's quite controversial because then who is deciding what is best for us? But in terms of our educational context, it is generally the teacher who's making that decision. With input from the students, but it's the teacher who's making that decision. So we have that, but as we saw with the three pictures, not everybody picked the one that I wanted them to pick. So it's not quite enough. So within that, often when we're trying to influence students' behaviour, we come at it from this angle. But there are two other areas that we need to establish first before nudge theory can be relevant. So we have a three-way approach. This comes from involve.org. The main ideas come from this blog, where people were thinking about changing attitudes and behavior about sustainability and environmental issues. So thinking of a way to encourage people and make them more likely to do things in a more environmentally friendly way. So I've taken the three-way approach that they've had and I've applied it to what we're trying to get our students to do. So hopefully it will map out in a very similar way. So the first of the three-way approach branches is shove. So we had nudge, which is a very gentle push, and shove, which is a much more violent push. So in this case, we're talking about legislation. So in terms of the environmental situation, they were looking at creating laws that would change attitudes or behavior. So for example, you must recycle. It is now illegal not to recycle, for example. So that's the idea behind the shove, the legislation plan or approach rather. The second stage is then think. So we're changing attitudes through intellectual engagement. So you talk to people, find out why it's valuable, why it's important, why are we doing things in this way. And from there, once we have the context, the legal context within which we do things, and we have people thinking about it actively and thinking about it very structurally, why are we bothering to do this? Then we can think about nudging people in a general direction, so influencing individual actions so that they change their behavior and they move in the way that we want them to move. So when we transfer this into an educational situation, the shove, the legislation, is more of an assessment approach, so changing our assessment strategy and our assessment policy to reflect what we want the students to do and how we want them to think about it. Then the thinking is engaging the students in the intellectual process, in the intellectual experience of learning, and then nudging them every now and then to get on and do what we've asked them to do. So it's not just from the right-hand side of the screen We're not just attempting to nudge them with more or less strength. We are approaching it from a more holistic way, which I realize things like assessment strategy is often beyond the responsibility of the teacher. But within the way that you set your own continuous assessment grades, you can apply the same principles that we're going to talk about just now. So we're now working at least partially online. So we're talking about touchstone blended learning, and we have several different elements that we need to assess in order to come up with a grade at the end of the term. So we have face-to-face components. So what are they doing face-to-face? Are they doing debates? Are they giving presentations? Are they persuading each other of different points of view? Are they giving directions? Then we look at the online self-study with Touchstone. There are a lot of grammar, vocabulary, figured out, conversation strategy type exercises that the students can do. How do we assess those? And then online collaborative work, so working together in forums, using blogs, wikis, that kind of stuff. How do we assess that, and how do we use that assessment to motivate the students to participate in all three of those sides of things? So a question for you now. Oh, in the wrong place. A question for you. How do we as teachers assess the work our students are doing? So just take a minute to think about that and post your answers in the chat box. How do we assess the work our students are doing? What do we do to assess them? What are we looking for? Okay, yeah, we grade the activities they do. And what kind of activities are you getting them to do? Encouraging remarks, nice tests, feedback, yeah. And analyzing the feedback. Observations, yeah. Yeah, we test them. Okay, so there's the standard tests and things that were part of your curriculum, and then you're going to assess them in different ways as they're doing different activities, as they're participating in class, when they're doing tasks, so working together, their collaboration. And as Sandra has mentioned, using rubrics to get feedback from students as well. And this is something that we definitely need to think about as well. So there are various ways, either through traditional testing and exams, or through setting up specific tasks for them to complete while you pay attention to different things that they're doing, or making them do presentations, that kind of thing, which is things that have come up time and time again. So what we need to think about is the criteria that we are assessing them against. So if they're doing a debate and you're listening to how well they speak, obviously we need to be quite specific about the kinds of things that we want them to demonstrate during the speaking. So are they getting their ideas across? Are they being communicative and intelligible enough to convince the other person? Or are we looking more at grammatical structures, at expressions used to disagree politely, for example? What are we looking for? And then when we're assessing them and we set the rules, how are we enforcing those rules? How are we making sure that they are getting to the right area, they're doing the right thing, and they're behaving in the way that we have designed? And what about rewards and penalties? If they do well, what are we giving them? If they do badly, are they punished for this? Do they incur the teacher's wrath, or do they get encouragement and praise? What do we do about it? But when we're working online, we have a very important question, which is, what are we assessing? What are we looking at all? So we have said that tests, writings, class participation, but when we're working online as well, what do we do? So let's have a look at an example. So from Touchstone, on the screen you can see there's a grammar explanation. It's one of the activities that they do in any module. So beforehand they'll have done lots of activities to figure out the language. They'll have practiced some vocabulary, and now this is the summary to confirm that what they have figured out is correct. So at this point, we want to know that the students have studied present simple statements. Now, when we assess them, are we assessing them on their actions, or are we assessing them on what they've learned? So if I'm assessing on actions, my question is, did you complete Unit 4, Lesson A? And the answer is yes or no. And I can get that information from the data in the gradebook. Yes, they did, or no, they didn't, which is fine. That's the one way of looking at it. But better is looking at what they learned from doing the activity. Can you complete a communicative task using present simple statements? So in one case, looking at assessing the actions, one thing that we can end up with, especially when we have unmotivated students, is that they'll do the bare minimum in order to get the percentage that you have specified in the gradebook. So if you've said you need to get 80% to pass, they'll do 79 to 80% to get the grade to move on. And they're not necessarily going to think very deeply about what they're doing, and they're not necessarily going to engage that well with the material or with the learning outcome. If, on the other hand, we are assessing the learning, can you complete a communicative task? So in this case, we would, after we've asked them to do this online at home, we come into class and we do a communicative activity, and they need to have studied before they can participate in this task. It's a dangerous thing at this point because we don't want to create tasks that students cannot do at all if they haven't done the work online beforehand. But we want to create a task where students can do it well or not so well. But either way, they can achieve the task so that the teacher doesn't end up reformulating the whole lesson plan and just repeating the grammar points as they go. So in this, we create the task, they do the task. If they've done whether they've done the work or not will be evident in how well they do the task. But also, if they've done the work and engaged with it and learned from it, then they will do the task very well. If they've done the task but not really paid much attention, then that will also show in their performance. So we are able to assess not only whether they've done it, but how well they've learned from it. So there's a different motivation in the activity online, knowing what's going to come out of it. So am I doing this just for a score, or am I doing this in order to be able to perform better in that particular task? And not only in that particular task, but in the life skill or life activity that task prepares me for. So the assessment side of things has a bit of a more complex way of looking at motivating students. So we want to really focus on assessing the learning. There's no harm in assessing the action as well, but if you're only assessing actions, you will often run into problems with the students not engaging and ending up with cheating can be a problem, whereas if we're looking at learning, it's very difficult to fake learning. It's very easy to fake action. It's very difficult to fake learning. Well, one hopes. Anyway, so it's a slightly different approach to the assessment idea. Another way of looking at assessment is by using portfolios. Lots of institutions do use portfolios. Some don't like them at all, but it's a slightly different approach in that the students make decisions about what they're going to keep in their portfolios and what the purpose of any of those things is. So they put in examples of their work into their portfolio. And traditionally, portfolios were folders, and students put scrappy bits of paper into, and they kept them all the way to the end, and then who knows what happened to them at the end. When we look at digital portfolios, and our CLMS now has a portfolio functionality where students can do pieces of writing that are kept together in a single place, and where they can also write free writing related to that, but we'll get into that more in a second. So in an online portfolio, students can put in examples of writing. They can keep examples of speaking with audio files, and they have a number of different options where they can keep things with comments. So in our portfolio, for example, if a student does a piece of writing and a teacher comments on it, that comment is also saved near where the rest of the work is. So you can keep your teacher's comments as well, which is very valuable in terms of working out a grade for overall work. So there may also be a cover page with grades for classwork, grades for online activities. So you're collecting all of your achievements all in the same place. And then we collect the comments from teachers and facilitators, or even from peers on work or collaborative activities that they've done together. So this is in its purest assessment form, assessment only. It's a collection of things that we can use for evaluation purposes. And we will look at enriching that a little bit more in a second with the engagement piece as well. So those are our main assessment approaches. So then we're going to look at engagement as well, thinking. This is the think part. So imagine it's the beginning of term, the beginning of the semester, and you've got 20 new students, and how are you going to get them excited about what and how they're going to learn in the coming semester? What activities would you do? What would you tell them? What would you ask them? If you can put your answers in the chat box, that would be great. It's not an easy question. Pre-assessment. What do you mean by pre-assessment, Joanna? Okay, ask about their interests. Good. Needs analysis, yeah. Okay, yeah. Okay, so there are a number of ways. One way is to make sure that you're setting up good group rapport and doing different activities to make sure that they share their interests with other people in the group. You can see limited choices, also a good plan, a brief introduction, yeah. And okay, so we're looking more at assessment as well. Okay, so there's setting up rapport, making sure that they feel comfortable with each other, that they can tell each other their interests, and that you get a clear idea of what they're interested in and what their majors are. So depending on the type of institution that you work in, most people will have another motivation for learning English. Some people just do it because they like it and they're the easiest to motivate to do anything. Most people will have an interest in studying abroad or studying a particular subject, so they will have career interests. They're studying to get a better job. They will have different things that they'll want to do. So even if you're looking at very disparate goals, overall goals within the class, you can ask them to make a note, so to make a statement to themselves of what it is that they want to get out of this experience in the end overall. What is the point? So the engagement issue is making them think about what they're doing and why they're doing it. So what is the point? When we look at things like interests, there's always a way to turn a topic in a particular way, to give it another perspective, to look at it in a slightly different way that will make it potentially more interesting to people who would otherwise not be as interested in the topic. So as somebody mentioned, we do have coursebooks. Coursebooks are generally based on Common European Framework standards, and topics are often predefined as internationally of interest, etc. So they can be quite neutral, but that then means that the teacher has a lot of scope to make them more specific to the group, or to add different perspectives or more local perspectives into those very generic topics that will make it that little bit more attention grabbing for the group that you've got. But there are a number of ways that we can go about making this happen, getting them really excited. So setting up their goals overall, and then setting up their goals in smaller steps is always a good plan. So we want to set goals long-term and short-term. So Why are you studying English in general? What is your ultimate goal? And then by the end of the semester, what do you want to be able to do? So this often involves can-do statements. So things like, again, the Common European Framework provides plenty of can-do statements. At the beginning of every unit of Touchstone, there are statements of what the unit wants to achieve. So you can work with those. And if you have, those are very much short-term goals. If you have students who want to be able to write a dissertation in English, for example, and the goals of the unit are to talk about your family and friends, and you need to find some way of linking up the longer-term goals and the shorter-term goals. So maybe it's an activity type that they're not really that interested in, but when teachers think about it, normally there is something, some language point or some skill point within the work that you're doing right now that does count, possibly in a very small way, but it does count towards achieving those longer term goals as well. So being able to point that out as you go through is a very powerful motivator. So we're talking about not just looking at, come on, do your homework, go on. You're looking at a much bigger picture and then bringing their attention back to that bigger picture on a regular basis. So when it's very easy to get bogged down in the details of every day, very easy to, and that's what puts people off. So if we're looking at details, but it works towards this nice big picture, details working towards this nice big picture, so that there's always a sense of progress. If you're studying something and you don't feel you're making any progress, it's very frustrating, and frustrating will push them away rather than bringing them into what you want them to do. So showing them regularly, okay, so we've seen these goals at the beginning of the unit, we've done this work, and now look, even if you don't know more grammar structures, but you know them better, you can use them better, you can use them in more context. You've learned more vocabulary related to the topic, etc. There are ways of showing that. So showing progress against short-term and long-term goals is very, very good. Then learner training is a huge thing that teachers have to do. So we have a lot of training the learners. Often when we talk about online learning, teachers automatically think that learner training means showing them how to use an LMS, when actually our students can figure out their way around an LMS much quicker than we can. And that's just something that we need to introduce them to briefly, but what we really need to help them with are more traditional things like managing your time and looking at your feedback from the system and deciding what kind of work you need to do next. Thinking about what types of activities are most useful for you. Things like needs analysis. So we've done a needs analysis. What do the answers then mean? So it doesn't have to always depend on the teacher, the actions that come next, but showing the students, okay, so maybe you do learning styles analysis. It's not really, it's a less fashionable idea now, but you know, you can, if you want, if they're bored of doing a specific kind of kinesthetic activity, let's say they can move into doing more visual type activities. And you can show them examples of those. And that's a very small drip feeding of training. It's not a week of learning training that you would do at the very beginning, because when it comes to second year and they've done it already, they're really not going to engage with it at all. But drip feeding them these ideas as they go through the course, learning that little bit more. Oh yeah, I could also do it like that. Okay, so when I get those results, this is how I need to look at it, and these are the things that I can do, these alternatives that I can take. So it's all about empowering the learner to make their own decisions. And it's something that it can be quite difficult for the teacher to do. Sometimes you don't have very many ideas in the beginning, but it is something that you can work on, and you can build your repertoire of these as you go. So the next one is making the activities relevant to the students' interests and main studies. So this we talked about a little bit on the last slide. So regardless of the topic in the book, you can always look at the same topic from another perspective to include somebody's interests and their main studies. So if you're looking at processes, for example, as a kind of standard IELTS writing part 1 task. Processes can be anything. In the exam, it will be a process of something they're not familiar with, but maybe you're teaching engineers, or maybe you're teaching people who are studying humanities, but there's something that you can use, the language of processes within engineering and within humanities. There's always a way of linking it up. So you can get them to do the activities as per the book, but then you can branch out into the areas of their interest and apply the language in the new context, so that it includes everything. And you don't have to teach them all the things from their main studies, but just show them that actually it's relevant to what you're doing, and linking it back again to the long-term and the short-term goals. So this is what I mean by having this open, ongoing dialogue of how the activities work towards goals. So it's much easier to say, come on, do your homework, if they know that their homework is going to take another baby step towards their final destination. Unless if you're asking them to do something that seems totally irrelevant and not linked to what they're trying to do overall, they're really not going to be very motivated at all. So a lot of us teach in situations where students are doing English in order to start their main studies or alongside their main studies. So they have a certain amount of English that they have to pass in order to get their degree in biology, for example. So they're not particularly motivated, they're really just doing it for the score. But if you can bring in the goals of working in an international company, or even working with another colleague from somewhere else, or collaborating in the cloud with other biologists, reading articles and scientific material from elsewhere, even that will help create a more serious, a long-term goal that the students can take more seriously than just, okay, well, I'm talking about my family, let's move on. So there's keeping that dialogue open. Like, well, I don't want to do this, it's not relevant. Well, let's look at how it could be relevant. What language in this will you need to use when talking about the topic that you're most interested in and you're most likely to be working in? And making sure that the students are part of that dialogue, and that once you've had this conversation with them a few times, they can start having the conversation with themselves, so that you're not having to do it all the time. But once you get to that point, you know that your students are, intellectually at least, engaged. And the last one is overtly linking online work and face-to-face work. So all of that, the other points are all very kind of bigger picture, keeping everything relevant to, every now and then you take your head above water and you see, yes, I'm still going in the right direction. Okay, head back down and keep swimming. When we look at the last one, it's very much day to day, week to week. I'm doing this work online because it will help me perform better in class on Thursday, for example. So in class on Thursday, I know I'm going to have to do a role play in a shop. So now I better get on and check the vocabulary that I'm going to need to do that well. And making sure that you congratulate them for doing it. You maybe use screenshots from the work online. You use that in class, as a colleague of ours in Honduras does, and make sure that they're doing that in an engaged way by looking at each one as part of an overall experience, rather than a separate online experience and a separate face-to-face experience. They don't necessarily work if they're entirely separate. So you need to make one depend on the other to a certain extent, not completely, but just so that it feels like it's one integrated thing that they're doing. So from that, we go back to our portfolio notion. So if we think about the setting goals and thinking about things longer term, we can look at the portfolio in a slightly different way. So we've already got them collecting all these items to put in their portfolio to show what they've done, and to show what other people have thought of what they've done, and potentially what they've thought of what they've done. So we're now asking them, if we're going the engagement route, we now want them to review and evaluate each item in their portfolio. Is this any good? is it worth keeping in my portfolio? So one way of managing a portfolio is that you can tell your students that they can have 10 items in the portfolio. That is all. And over a course, they'll come up with, maybe 25, 30 more, depending on the types of activities you want them to do. But one very simple way of reviewing and evaluating the items is to take out loads of them. So they have to decide. It's a very, very simple self-evaluation process. Is this good enough to go in my portfolio? Yes or no. And if it's yes, then it stays in. If it's no, then they get rid of it, or maybe keep it in a different folder that they don't use for assessment at the end. They need to, in order to decide whether it's worth keeping in the portfolio, they need to think critically about how or if those items show improvement. So we don't really want 10 pieces of writing from the last 2 weeks of the course, because obviously they don't really show any development. But if we have a piece of writing from each week, for example, the best item from each week that they keep, how do these items show that they've improved? So we want to see that it's better. They've got fewer red marks, for example, or fewer comments from the teacher if we're using the writing tool in the Cambridge LMS. But we also want them to reflect on how their achievements, which are these pieces of writing and how well they've done, how their achievements relate to their goals. So looking at those pieces of writing, and I'm just using pieces of writing as an example, it could be audio or anything else. How did those things relate to what they're trying to achieve overall? So you can ask the students to write a short paragraph stating why these pieces of writing demonstrate their development or demonstrate their ability to work towards their overall goals or to work towards their goals for the semester. So it's very much an academic English thought process, in that it's critical thinking, it's self-evaluation, and it's reflection, which are very important skills if we are training our learners we're preparing them to go on to university studies, either in an English-speaking country or not. And they're very valuable also even if the students are only preparing, even if they only want to prepare for IELTS or any international exam, even just down to the point of, okay, I've written this letter of complaint or whatever it is. Does it achieve my task? How are my grammatical structures? And the ability to evaluate whether they've done a good job or not before they give it to the teacher, for the teacher to decide whether they've done a good job or not and give them a grade based on that. So a portfolio, if it's used effectively, can be an excellent tool both from the assessment side of motivation and the engagement side of motivation. And you don't have to have a portfolio to kind of take some elements of portfolio thinking and apply them in your teaching generally. So you could ask them to do the reflection on their achievements anyway. You don't have to have a portfolio for it, but you could ask them to do that piece of writing towards either at the middle or towards the end of the course. And if their reflection is that they're absolutely amazing and that your reflection is that they're slightly less amazing, then obviously they're not quite thinking critically enough about their own performance, and that's something that you might need to or want to address, which would again help train them to think critically, to look at what they're doing and to make decisions about what they're going to do next. So there's two big sides, assessment and engagement. And then once we have our general structure of what they have to do. So we've included in our assessment, let's say we've decided that they must do this many online activities and it must be visible in their face-to-face time that they have learned something from those activities. They must contribute to 3 forums, for example, and they must attend classes and they have to participate. So we've said this is our assessment strategy, and within that we have engaged with them to see why are they asked to do this, how does it help them work towards their final goals, so that we've created a very positive bias towards students doing what we want them to do, because A, because they have to, and B, because hopefully they want to on a larger scale. But now we're back to where we were at the beginning, in that we want to influence their behaviour on a daily or weekly basis. But now we're influencing their behaviour on a daily or weekly basis within a very positive atmosphere, if you like. So nudges, so pushing them in the right direction, can include any of the following. So we could send email reminders every week or announcements with links through to a login page. So this could be, for example, almost everybody in your class has done the online work. If you haven't done yours, please click here to log in and do your activities before tomorrow, for example. So always include the link. And in general, nudges need to be phrased very positively. So again, nudges are about presenting the information in a positive, encouraging way. So rather than half the class hasn't done their activities, please click here to do them, we go, half the class has already done it. If you want to be one of them, please click here. So it's just a much more smiley way of getting them to follow your link, basically. Another way of doing it is we have, I'm running a course at the moment where I need 6 people to run a group. And if I have only got 2 people, I will send a message saying, I'll send an announcement in the class, in the LMS, to say, 3 places left for tomorrow's class. And I might not get 3 people to come to the class, but I'll get 2. So it's just, again, it's very positive, and it makes the session seem not more valuable but more fleeting. So, oh, I better get in quick and take my opportunity now. So making your email reminders look like opportunities to be part of the winning set, if you like, rather than complaining about them not doing what they want to do. So on a regular basis, nice and light-hearted, keeping it encouraging and positive is one way that we can nudge them towards the action that we want them to take. Another way of nudging is providing very clear instructions for communicative tasks. So if you're asking them to do a forum activity, your instructions need to be super, super, super clear. So everything needs to be totally understandable. So why are they doing it? What's the point? What's the task to be achieved? How are they going to achieve it? Any confusion will nudge your students away from what you want them to do. So extra clarity is very, very important. Student-friendly timing is also a big deal. And by that, I mean, if you're asking them to do, for example, a forum activity, you want to make sure that you're asking them to do it at a time that is manageable for them. So not coming up to final exams, for example. They're not going to participate coming up to final exams. But let's say they don't have any classes between Thursday and Tuesday. You would ask them to do them after the Thursday class, not after the Tuesday class, because they just won't have time. You also need to run activities like that for long enough for everyone to participate, but not so long that they'll get bored of the topic or the discussion. So keeping the timing quite realistic. So generally about a week, no longer than a week, and definitely no shorter than 5 days, or you won't get, people won't even notice that it's happening before it's finished. If you're trying to do it on a day-by-day basis, you might end up getting students participating in order to get a point for the action rather than engaging with it properly to learn something. So it kind of undermines your assessment if you do it for too short a time. So yes, timing is very important, and communicate that timing to them in your instructions. The other 3 kind of nudges are, they're a little bit on the engagement side, but what we want is for, again, linking the online work to the face-to-face time. So if you're going to do interactive activities online, then you need to set them up in class. So either you open the topic or you give the instructions, the first half of the instructions, or you do something that makes the forum activity seem really interesting, or you start it with a game and then it goes on to they go away and research a topic and come back and post their opinions about it in order to achieve a particular goal. So setting that up while you're still in class. And then once that's done, when you come back into class, recognizing interesting contributions. So we often think of, okay, they're working online, they're doing these things, and they're making loads of mistakes. I must correct their mistakes. And yes, we do need to address their mistakes, but we also need to address that they have contributed. We need to address their ideas and interact with them as people, not just as the makers of mistakes. So when we go into class afterwards, we will look at, okay, there's a very interesting point that Sandra made, and I noticed that somebody else disagreed, and you can continue and summarize the conversation in the classroom, so it can finish off, and you can tie it off quite nicely that way. And then you can look at working on some of the language points that came out. So maybe make a game out of the language issues that came up in common through the group, and then praising good work done online. So I noticed that you three did some really great work, and I noticed you've improved a lot since the first time you tried this. So really making it very much part of the same experience. So you did that, well done, here it is, and we're moving on, knowing that you have completed those sections. So it just makes it that little bit more appealing, which is what we're going for. You will inevitably end up going, come on, do your homework to some people. But by approaching it with the three-pronged approach, the shove, i.e. the assessment, the engagement, intellectual engagement, and nudging them gently in the right direction, you should be able to get most people to do most things. There's always exceptions, but we do have within this kind of three-sided approach, we can cover most instances. So just put it all together. We have shoving, which is our assessment strategy. So you need to assess, as somebody was saying, we need to assess everything they do. So that includes what they do online, what they do with people online, what they do with people in the classroom. What's the balance of the scores, and how are you assessing it? Are you assessing action only, or are you assessing learning? And assessing learning is far more likely to bring you to successful conclusion. Then we are looking at think, which is engaging students in the process, so they understand what they're doing, why they're doing it, how it benefits them now, and how it benefits them in the future. And this doesn't have to be lecturing, but activities with stating can-do statements. I can do this, and I want to be able to do it, so I'm going to go and do those things, and then at the end, hopefully, I will be able to say that, yes, I can. And then nudging, making it easy or desirable to do the right thing. So with those three, hopefully, you should have some good results. So just before we finish up, I have a little quiz for you. We have, there's a website where you can download 101 tips to motivate the virtual learner, and it's a corporate training website, so it's not necessarily exactly what we're doing. So it's aimed at companies who are running e-learning for their employees, but there are a lot of tips in there that we can recycle within the educational context. So you'll notice I'm looking beyond education for ideas within our context as well. So on this, there is a tip that says, make the "what's in it for me" message loud and clear. Provide information about why and how the training will benefit the participants. Use testimonials or schedule an informational meeting so interested participants can come and ask questions about the value virtual learning offers. Do you think this is a shove, think, or a nudge? Is it assessment, engagement, or a nudge? Just write your answers in the chat box. You have 10 seconds. Okay, so well done. It's about the thinking. So it's about making the the students understand what the point is. So what are they doing? Why are they trying to do it this way? And another one from the same place, tip number 57, send a regular weekly or monthly email so employees start looking forward to receiving it. Make sure the subject line of the email is attention grabbing so it does not get lost in the shuffle of emails that everyone receives. Is it engagement, assessment, or nudge? Yes, I see nothing but nudges in the chat box, absolutely. So it is, yes, it is a nudge. So it's exactly that little reminder, little tiny bit. It's not annoying. It's quite positive, exciting. This is exactly what nudging is all about. And the last one, I'm sure you can guess before we do it. Tip 31: assess all components of the blend. If you focus solely on the live environment, participants will come to the view that self-directed components as optional and often will not complete them. Is this shove, think, or nudge? Assessment, engagement, or nudge? Yes, it is a definite shove. There's nothing gentle about this at all. It's very much make sure everything you do, everything you're asking them to do is part of the assessment. Brilliant. Okay, so those are our three kind of prongs. There are lots of resources on the internet about motivating students, and I'm sure as you have a look through them, you'll be able to see where they fit into your framework of assessment, engagement, and nudging, and see whether they fit in. And you can often have a look at what you're doing at the moment. So your homework is to have a look at how you're trying to motivate your students at the moment. And are you motivating them in a shoving way, in a thinking way, or in a nudging way? And if you're over balanced, if the balance is out, so if you're over reliant on nudging, then maybe you need to move a little bit of focus onto the assessment side or the engagement side. So often the engagement and the assessment are bits that we overlook, or the nudges are not quite positive or whatever. So there are various ways that you can have a look and balance it nicely so that the students feel positive, they know what's expected of them, and when you say, come on, do your homework, then it's a last resort, but they feel quite positive about it and want to do it and learn lots. Okay, so that's all from me. Are there any questions?
Indeed, there are. A lot of questions have come in already, Deirdre, so thank you very much for your talk. I'm sure you'll be able to answer them all. First question from Oksana Kosiko, who says, you mentioned in passing you weren't a big fan of portfolios, and Oksana wondered why.
Oh, I'm a huge fan of portfolios. Some institutions are not fans of portfolios. It depends very much on the institution. It depends very much on the cultural context that they're in, that they may or may not embrace portfolios, because it's quite a departure from traditional exam-based assessment. It can be quite difficult for institutions to get their heads around and work in this very different reflective self-assessment. It's much more kind of emotional, if you like, the reflection, cognitive, not cognitive, critical thinking types of assessment. So it can be very different. But I am a big fan, certainly, of using some portfolio thinking, even if you are in a very exam-based assessment system.
Great, thanks, Deirdre, for clearing that up. We've had the same question from a couple of people, from Leo and Giovanna, who both asked whether you can recommend any particular websites for creating e-portfolios.
Well, obviously, I'm going to say the Cambridge LMS because we have now got a portfolio tool if you're using any of our your products. Also, PebblePad, I think, was quite good, and PDWiki, I think that was a long time ago. I don't really know. I haven't looked into independent e-portfolio sites for a while, but I can research that and get back to you and pass it on via Alistair.
Thanks very much. Question now from Jocelyn Castaños, who asks, what are your thoughts about gamification as a tool to promote motivation, particularly points and badges earned that show achievement on a particular platform?
I think it depends very much on your students and whether they're into that type of thing. But in terms of the badges and achievements and things like that, I think it's a very, very positive tool. And in the same way as we would in class reward positive behaviour and praise good contributions, etc., all of those things help to chip away, because motivation is not one big action. It's a compilation of many tiny things that motivate people in different ways on different days. So I think the gamification can be a very powerful tool as well, depending on your learners. Some people don't like that kind of stuff at all. Some people really do. So I think you as a teacher will be best placed to knowing your students to be able to answer that question for yourself. So yeah, but in general, I think it's very positive.
Thanks. Question from Sandra Navita Adiani, who asks, how do we motivate the unmotivated? And in her case, she says, some of the learners have poor technology facilities, so quite often they can't complete the online tasks on time, and so the face-to-face lessons then drag a bit.
Okay, there's a couple of things in that. So motivating the unmotivated is, as I hear it, is a more kind of emotional, intellectual question, but technological access is a practical question. So in terms of getting people who are just not really that into it to do it, and I think going via the three-pronged approach, really talk to them, identify why it is that they're not motivated, find out what could personally motivate them in terms of their interest, in terms of their overall goals, that kind of thing, bringing that in, and then the assessment thing, making it clear that it's fair, it's the same for everybody, and that's just how it has to be. And then in the nudging, just relating your nudges to their goals as well if they're being particularly resistant. So making sure that they know that you've heard them, that you've heard their objections or their list of reasons for resistance, and address those overtly. In terms of the technological stuff, if you have students who don't have great access, then you might need to rethink how much you want your students to work online. So do you want them to do slightly less work online to make sure that everybody does it? And also when it comes to the face-to-face lesson, as I was saying earlier about the assessment thing, we don't want to create a lesson that depends absolutely on students having done the online work. We want to create a lesson that students can do kind of okay-ish if they haven't done it, but that they can do really well if they have done it. So things like creating communicative tasks that they can do anyway, that even if the language is not so great, they can still achieve the task. And then with the ones who have managed to do it, that they can do it really well and be creative and explore the language a little bit and be a bit more personal about it. So in terms of planning your lessons, you want to maybe reduce the amount of online work to make sure that those people with reduced technological access get enough time to do at least part of it, but then also creating lessons that are not entirely dependent, but lessons that won't fail if the students haven't done the work, so that the lesson can succeed either way, is my kind of advice.
Thanks. Couple of questions from Tatiana Rapina and Olga Shkova, who ask about the role of self-assessment and cross-assessment in all this. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think self-assessment, and if I understand correctly, cross-assessment means peer assessment, so when students assess each other. I think they have a very strong force in this, and I think in terms of training learners to be more self-sufficient, to evaluate themselves, to review their own work, to make decisions based on that, I think they're really, really important. And I think they're a major element of the engagement piece. So peer assessment is good for two things. One, it trains them to self-assess as well, because if they're looking at a piece of writing or listening to somebody do a long turn, for example, then they are able to assess a piece of language or a communicative piece, and if they can do it for someone else, it makes it easier for them to do for themselves. But it also helps them to cross the barriers of fear, in that if I'm working with a partner and I have to do my long turn in preparation for my IELTS exam or the oral exam at the end of the course, then I do this with someone else, and it's quite nerve-wracking, and I don't know if I'm going to do it properly, or maybe they'll laugh at me if I make mistakes. And then my partner says, okay, you did these things really well, that was very nice, you made a mistake with your present perfect, and I'm not sure if that's the correct thing to conclude your talk, but let's ask the teacher. It takes away from the stress of performance to be able to do that again and again and again. And it really does help the engagement side of the approach that we talked about today, just in terms of making them feel more confident and helping them develop their critical thinking and self-evaluation skills.
Okay, thank you very much, Deirdre. I think that's all we've got time for today. And in fact, we'll be taking a bit of a break from our Tuesday webinars for the summer now, but we'll be back in a few months with a brand new series of webinars from some of the top names in ELT. Don't forget that in the interim, you can find out and keep up with all of our news on our Facebook page, via Twitter, via our YouTube channel, and on our blog. And I've posted links to all of those in the chat. So I'd just like to finish with thank you very much, everyone, for attending, and thank you, obviously, in particular, Deirdre, for another excellent session. We all very much appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Alistair. And very nice to talk to you all, and see you again soon.
Thanks very much. Bye, everybody.